Good morning. Can we have everyone to take their seats as we get prepared to start? Don't be shy. Come closer. Well, good morning. My name is Anissa Ferguson, and I'm a part of the Sentinel team here. I'm the Sentinel contract lead. I want to welcome each and every one of you to day 2. Can you guys do me one quick favor and just stand up? I know laptops, I'm sorry. Can you repeat after me? My presence has purpose, and that is to protect the public health. Thank you. You can take your seats. I just want to welcome you because today is not just another workshop, right? This is the second day as a part of something very awesome that we're trying to do and that we're trying to move progressively into our future. So I just wanted to go over a couple things, welcome you all, and go through a few of our housekeeping rules. Is that fair? Okay, so you see we have 3 huge screens here, so if you happen to fall asleep, turn this way, and you'll still be able to catch the screen, okay? Has everyone been able to access Wi-Fi that needs to access Wi-Fi? Okay, awesome. So in case you forget, just be sure to access the public, FDA public site, and the passcode is public access. Super easy. Also, I believe that the kiosk is now open, so for all of you who are interested in grabbing coffee or juice, please feel free to do so. And then make your way back. If you're interested in ordering lunch, I believe the cost is $11, and you'll be able to just hold on to your receipt, and you'll be able to have your order ready when you go back out for lunch. We have a packed schedule. I believe someone was just speaking to me and asking about if there was any overlap from yesterday to today because he had not attended yesterday. So I just encourage him to enjoy today's presentations. And so you have a full schedule of where we are, and I wanted to do just a very quick welcome and thank you to the Sentinel team. The Sentinel lead is Mr. Michael Wynn in the back. Please just raise your hand. He works tirelessly and very hard to make sure that everything gets done. So I just wanted to acknowledge him, and I also wanted to acknowledge the rest of our team, Ms. Jamila Wadow, raise your hand, Tyler Coyle, Sarah Dutcher, who I believe is helping with, oh, she's here, and also, I think that's it, myself. And we have so many people from FDA who have also volunteered, including all of our AV support and Martha in the back and all of the SOC. So we just want to welcome you. And this morning, I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of Dr. Robert Ball.
Good morning, everybody here and online. And thank you, Anissa, for that very energetic opening. And I just want to echo Anissa's welcoming comments, and thank you all for being here today. I hope that some of you were able to be at the Sentinel annual meeting yesterday to hear about the important progress that's been made in the program, and also some of the thoughts about where we might be going in the future. And I think today is a very important next step, and that is we have committed to open Sentinel to make the tools more available and more understanding, at least in part through training. So we had a session last year that sort of was a Sentinel 101, and this training is intended to bring us to the next level. And as you can see from the agenda, we're going to be getting into the details of how the methods are implemented in the Sentinel tools and how the analyses are done. And I also just wanted to point to yesterday. I think one of the exciting pieces of the presentations was how through IMEDS and even on their own, companies have begun to use the Sentinel infrastructure and the Sentinel tools. And this is a next step, I think, to help expand that effort. So again, welcome, and I want to introduce Rich Platt, who needs no introduction, and thank him for all his efforts in leading the initiative.
Thanks, Bob, but I'll introduce myself anyway. I'm the principal investigator of the lead contractor at Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Institute. So I'm delighted to be able to be here with you today, along with a number of my colleagues who are doing the heavy lifting in this discussion. As Bob said, our among our goals is to create a community of knowledgeable users and contributors to a suite of analytic tools that can make use of the very substantial kinds of resources that are becoming available. That includes, we hope, the Sentinel distributed data set, but it isn't limited to that. We have, in the past few months, made the CMS data, Medicare fee-for-service data, a part of the Sentinel system, and that's the kind of data that is available to the public. And so part of what we're trying to do today is to help you and others who are interested to understand what the suite of tools can currently do. Picking up from what Bob said, the first session that we had covered our descriptive tools. These conversations today will cover the tools that do what we call inferential analysis, trying to understand cause and effect between exposures and outcomes of products. What we're not going to cover today is how do you actually use the tools. That's something that we understand is worthy of attention and is on our agenda for sometime in the not too distant future. We think that will work best if we do it in the form of sort of hands-on workshops, and we're looking forward to setting that up. The kinds of things that we hope will emerge from this is first of all a bigger user community who use these kinds of tools in CMS data, as I described, and in some of the larger licensable data sets. We have code that will transform the market scan data, for instance, into Sentinel data model format, in which case these kinds of tools can be useful. Longer range, we hope that the user community will start to collaborate in extending these tools. There are lots of ways that they can be enhanced. It would be terrific to have a community of users who are engaged in that kind of collaboration to make a stronger, better, more useful set of tools to do high quality observational evaluations using these kinds of routinely collected data. So that's the long-term agenda. Long-term means months or a year, not 5 or 10 years, and we look forward to working together with you in that. So I'm going to, and I'll be around for a good chunk of the day, and be happy to talk with any of you offline if that would be useful, as will any of my colleagues. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Tyler to do the real work.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Bob, and thank all of you for coming today. We're really excited about today's program, and in the escape out of this. In the spirit of data enthusiasm, we have prepared a pre-training knowledge check that we would like for folks to participate with. So I'm going to click on present. Okay, so at check-in, there was a little card that had a website and login on it. I would ask that if you have a mobile device or a laptop, that you please go onto that so that we can get a little bit of information about where we're starting, and then at the end of the day, we'll get a little bit of information about where we've come. So the first question is, are you here or are you elsewhere? All right. I'll give everyone a minute or two because I think once we get the initial login step complete, the rest of the questions will probably get answered a little bit faster than the first one. But okay. Okay. Many of you are here, and that is terrific. So, okay, we're going to go on to the next question. What best describes your professional industry? Government, pharmaceutical biotech, healthcare, academia, nonprofit, or media? I love watching it in real time. It's really neat. All right. So we'll move on to our next question. And as you can imagine, some of these first questions will remain static. I don't think that these are going to change by the end of the day. Did you attend the Sentinel public training on July 10, 2017? Yes, no, or unclear? And at this moment, I'll take the opportunity to dovetail off of what one of the previous, one of our introducers said, was that this training, this day's training is designed to build off of the previous training, but that does not mean that we won't cover what you need to know in order to benefit greatly from today's workshop. So we will be doing an overview so that we can hopefully catch everyone up. All right. Have you ever performed a propensity score analysis or a self-controlled risk interval analysis? All right. How well do you feel you understand Sentinel's analytic capabilities? Very well, well, somewhat well, not at all. Oh, nice little bell curve. All right. Next question. Have you ever downloaded and or used any of Sentinel's analytic tools? All right. Terrific. So at this point, I'll be stepping away from the microphone, but I'm very happy to be introducing our next presenter, Judy Morrow, who's going to be providing a review of Sentinel system capabilities. Thanks very much. They appear to have passed the pre-knowledge check. It was close, but well done, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. So as the previous speakers have indicated, we wanted to catch you up because today is part 2 of a 2-part training. And so we wanted to spend a brief period of time talking about what part 1 covered. So for those of you who weren't able to attend either online or in person, you actually feel caught up to where we're going to start today. So I just want to point out first on the website, if you do want to go back to the part 1 training, that it's actually downloadable and available for you to go see. You can watch at your convenience, but the website is right here. So what we'll talk about is what is included in the Sentinel initiative, the types of data that are available in the patient populations that are captured, what we can reliably capture, what we think claims data primarily will actually ascertain, and that includes information on exposures, on outcomes, and covariates. And then we'll talk very briefly about the concept of the routine querying tools, or you can think of them, sometimes we call them modular programs. Really, they're SAS programs that are they're basically you add parameters, but they've been quality controlled and version controlled, and we utilize those routinely. So very briefly, some of you who were attending the public meeting yesterday probably saw this slide. So what is included in the Sentinel initiative? There's this sort of continuing sort of subsetting. What we're going to talk about today are what we think of as the routine queries and the other activities that use the pre-existing data. So that's in that Sentinel system box in the lower corner. So I think folks, if they did attend yesterday, saw this as well. These are the folks that comprise our ecosystem. So I work at the Department of Population Medicine with Rich Platt, and so we're the contractor for the Sentinel system. We have many data and scientific partners who I see in the audience today who are very close collaborators with us. And then we also have folks who don't provide data but do provide scientific input and are investigators that collaborate with us. So really briefly, I want to go over just the concepts of a distributed network and the available data elements for folks that, again, were not available at the July training. So primarily, the important thing to understand is that Sentinel utilizes secondary data. So what that means is data that is accumulated through the normal course of healthcare interactions. I go to the doctor, I get some diagnoses, I get a prescription, I go to my pharmacy, I get it dispensed. All of that information, all those transactions are recorded, and those are recorded in claims data. And we're utilizing that data, so we're leveraging it in order to try to gain some information out of it. So it's important to understand that the data is not primarily collected for the purpose of doing research. We're utilizing it by taking advantage of the fact that it already exists. So we have numerous data elements available. These are what we think of as our core tables or information about folks. So what does this include? Demographics about patients, their enrollment information, things related to the number of dispensings they have, the number of procedures they have, the number of diagnoses they have, and then we have some supplemental tables as well. So we have some clinical tables. Some of our data partners are able to contribute information on laboratories and vital signs. Those are captured here. We also are possibly can link with certain registries. Some of our data partners have those linkages. They go to death registries, and then that brings with it cause of death. There's also links to state immunization registries. And then finally, we have one data partner who has rich inpatient data, and they have 2 tables that are unique to them dealing with inpatient pharmacy. So normally, inpatient medications get bundled up in a claim, and so you can't necessarily see, especially things that are very low cost, things like aspirin or something like that. You can't see that that was dispensed, but you can see it in an inpatient setting when you're looking at the inpatient pharmacy. Additionally, we have an inpatient transfusion table, particularly geared at blood. So you guys also might have seen this yesterday, some just brief sort of sense of size and volume. I want to draw your attention to the row labeled people accruing new data. So what we're calling our traditional Sentinel was essentially our Sentinel pre-2018. We very recently added Medicare fee-for-service data. This comes through CMS's Virtual Research Data Center. And so we're now actively accruing information on roughly 67 million people. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the data philosophy so folks understand a distributed network. We at the Sentinel Operations Center do not own any of the data that we utilize. All of the data is owned by our data partners and resides primarily at our data partners. And so what we do is we send these programs out to our network, which I'll show a graphic of in a minute. They run these SAS programs, which we also call the modular programs or the querying tools, against their data, and they return to us aggregated results. We intend to minimize the transfer of any patient level information, and if we do transfer anything, it is always de-identified. We never require the data partners themselves to put their data together in a central location. So data partner A and data partner B always retain the ability to keep their data in separate locations. So this is a model of the Sentinel distributed data network. So this is what I just spoke about. So we're at the operations center. So when we want to send a program, we parameterize the program, and we'll talk about how to do that today. And then we go ahead and we send it out to our data partners. It goes behind their firewalls, and then the data partners themselves execute the program. They observe the results, and then they decide. They have the ability to opt out if they don't want to return that data. Normally they do, though. There's almost very few instances when they decide not to return that data. Part of the reason for that, though, is we do our very best to make it aggregate information that they feel comfortable sharing back with us. And so when they allow that data to come back to us, it again passes through the firewall, and then at the Sentinel Operations Center, we aggregate the data among the many data partners to get our whole distributed database represented. So we talked a little bit in the July training, and I want to talk again today about what data we really have. So basically, the first question anybody should ask when they have a regulatory question of interest or a safety question of interest is, are the data actually in the database that I'm seeking to find? And so one of the things we're going to talk about is which are the cohorts, the exposures, the outcomes, and the covariates we expect to see in what is primarily claims data, so that we know what's actually represented. And so we use this framework in July. We're carrying it forward here. A very simple metric, the stoplight metric. Green, you're good. Yellow, we should have a discussion. Red, we definitely don't have. So we start out with some cohort information. So age is very reliably captured in the Sentinel distributed database. All the data partners use date of birth in order to capture a very accurate age. Sex is very complete and reliably utilized. Race is something that we have as yellow because it's a discussion. We've had basically improving race information over the years. So if you have a query that is looking at a product that just came on the market in 2015, the race information associated with folks who are enrolled in 2015 is actually much, much better than data all the way back to 2000. And so there's a temporal trend with race where it's getting more and more populated as time goes on. And so some rules of thumb about exposures of interest. So we divide our exposures into two categories. One are self-administered, so this is where you go to a pharmacy, you pick up something, and then you give it to yourself. And one are medically administered. So you have to go to your doctor, for example. The easiest thing to think of is a vaccine. You go to your doctor, you get a vaccination. That's a medically attended exposure. So the green here are the outpatient pharmacy dispensings and any of the outpatients, injections, or infusions. The red here are over-the-counter drugs, which aren't captured in administrative data. So actually, like this morning, I had to go and buy nasal decongestant so my ears don't go crazy on the plane. My insurance company is never going to know that I went and purchased that this morning. And so that's going to be red. Inpatient pharmacy is going to be a discussion because we have these particular data partners who are EHR-based data partners who do have that information, but it's not throughout the network. And so when you have an inpatient, when you have an exposure that is primarily inpatient, that's an opportunity to have a discussion so that we can ask our data partners how well that's captured. So some rules of thumb with respect to outcomes. So essentially we're using ICD-9 and ICD-10 in order to ascertain outcomes. And so if the coding systems are available and they can identify those codes very easily, then we'll go ahead and be able to pick those up. For diagnoses where there isn't good clinical agreement on what the diagnosis is, or if there is some long delayed onset, we have to have a discussion about how well that's captured. So some sort of quick ideas is if everybody agrees, for example, a heart attack is a heart attack is a heart attack, that's going to be easy to capture. If it's something where the diagnosis is changing over time, so some things you can think of there are things like in the DSM-5, some new psychological diagnoses and things like that that change over time. It's something to think about when you're looking to ascertain your outcomes of interest. And then finally, covariates. Anything that is a history of either a drug or an actual diagnosis is going to be utilizing the same information, so that's going to be green. What we don't have are lifestyle factors. There's nowhere in your claim that says that you engage in lots of risky behaviors or that you're an alcoholic. Or, so some things like that we're just not going to capture in the claims-based information. For clinical data, we do have some data partners that contribute laboratory results and vital signs. And so again, depending on what your question of interest is, that's a conversation to have. So our takeaway messages, our outpatient exposures are reliably captured. We're very good at acute onset outcomes, especially ones that have very clear diagnostic criteria, both clinically and that they're well coded. Over-the-counter medications are not captured. Inpatient treatment capture requires a discussion. We may or may not be able to do it. It depends on what the question is. Non-medically attended events are not captured. So if you don't go to the doctor, we don't know that you didn't go to the doctor. Very briefly, because I'm running out of time, just want to spend 1 minute on what the programs actually are. So when we talk about the routine queries or the modular programs, what we're basically doing is we have a program that's already been version controlled. It's already been quality controlled. What we need to do is put in the parameters of interest to match the question of interest. So if you want to look for ACE inhibitors, for example, which I think is my example here, we have to actually get the national drug codes, the NDCs, that are related to ACE inhibitors and use that to populate our program. And that's how we actually implement these things with speed, because all of the pieces that you would always do, I always want to find a cohort of people. I always want to make sure they meet certain age criteria. I always want to make sure that they are new users of a particular drug of interest. I always want to make sure that they didn't use these other drugs of interest. That's something that is routine enough that we've written a program to do it, and now you just have to fill in the blanks of how your question actually works. And so again, as I mentioned, these are pre-tested and validated, and that significantly shortens our response time, and they have a very standard output. And so this is our query sequence. You can think of that first block, the summary table, as counts. You can think of that as just prep to research. You're looking there for, is something in the database or isn't it? And then if that's positive, you want to proceed, then the next piece is, can I actually do a cohort identification where I really well describe my population? So there what I'm thinking of is, do I have enough sample size to actually pursue my question of interest? And actually that was the focus, which we call a level 1 program or a descriptive query, of our July training in 2017. Today we're taking it to that next step. So we're presuming at this point that folks have done a thorough feasibility check. They've gotten all the numbers back. The sample size looks good. And now they're ready to proceed to inferential queries. And that's the focus of our work today. And that's it, and I'm running over, so I'm going to take questions later.
So hi, good morning everyone. My name is Ting-Ying Huang. I am a Sentinel investigator from SOC, Sentinel Operations Center. Today, this morning, I'm going to give a high-level introduction and training on our propensity score analysis tool. If you have never used propensity score, it's going to be a simple introduction. If you are already familiar with propensity score methods, this will be also a very simple review, along with a more detail in how to operationalize and using our tool. So before we get started, this is our Sentinel homepage, and I want to show you how to access our routine querying tools. If you open up and land on our homepage, on the right-hand side, there's a panel right there. And between those arrows, you can find a place that would take you to the link that you can download our tool documentation. So here's our landing page. We include not only the tool documentation, but also the SAS program package you can freely download from the same page. And once you open the PDF, this is the title page. You can scroll down to around page number 23. Starting from there, we will have detailed introduction of our propensity score analysis tool, including all the parameters and values and input files that you will need to prepare before you send the package. So agenda for this morning session, I'm going to briefly go over the active risk identification analysis system inside Sentinel. Also the analytic capabilities, the level 2 capabilities in ARIA. a very simple overview of propensity score methods. And we're going to use a case study to walk over the steps of how to parameterize our tool. So first of all, this you probably already heard a lot yesterday, is ARIA. ARIA represents FDA's active post-market risk identification analysis systems, and it's comprised of Sentinel Common Data Model and also the routine querying tool. Recall what Judy just mentioned in this big Sentinel initiative framework. Here's ARIA within the Sentinel system. So the analytic capabilities of ARIA are achieved by predefined, parameterized, reusable modular SAS programs. Every time we run a routine query, there should be no new codes written for each query. And as Judy just shown, that our typical query sequence go from the simple counts in summary tables, and then move on to level 1. You identify the cohort and provide descriptive information. And then the focus of today will be the level 2 inferential analysis. That would include the comparative assessment on drug use and the adverse event. And then we also have a final step of follow-up. So today, like I said, I will focus on the level 2 analysis. The level 2 capabilities inside ARIA actually include 2 different methods. My colleague Justin Bong will introduce the later one. I will be talking about the propensity score matching and stratification. So both propensity score methods and the self-control risk intervals are new user designs. In epidemiology, one of them is cohort design and the other one is case only. However, they are different in their implicit or explicit way of control of the non-time varying confounding. Propensity score do it more explicitly, and self-control risk interval, because it's self-control design, it automatically take care of that confounding. And then propensity score is generally considered as the observational analog of randomized control trials, whereas the self-control risk intervals are particularly useful for studying acute effects of intermittent exposures. The 2 methods actually answer different questions. Propensity score are more for the questions that ask, why does this happen to our exposure users or drug users? And then self-control risk intervals answers the questions that ask, why does this happen now, or a particular time interval? So in my session, in the following hour, we're going to focus on the propensity score matching and stratification methods. So right now, the following slides will give you a very high-level overview of the propensity score methods. Propensity score is a balance score, which briefly summarizes a number of member characteristics into a single variable. The single variable would be the propensity score itself. And these member characteristics, or quantitatively we call them covariates in the propensity score estimation model, could be, for example, the exposure calendar year, comorbidity scores, health services or drug utilizations, existing medical conditions or medical history, of course, the basic demographics such as age and sex. So for example, how do you actually operationalize this concept and model? Is that we define the members of interest and find this information for them and fill into a propensity score model. This information, for example, could be the age, sex, exposure calendar year, comorbidity score, and all those I just mentioned. So every individual could have different profile of these covariates. And we do that for all the members in our data set exposed to the target drug of interest. And propensity score basically is a probability estimated, provided that the estimated probability for the members to obtain the target treatment given their covariate profile. So on the left-hand side, you will see a propensity score calculated for each member of interest. And then because it's a probability, the range go from 0 to 1. And on average, patients with very similar propensity score share similar covariate profile. So in the 2 methods that we're going to introduce right now, There are actually both propensity score subclassifications, be it matching or stratification, and these subclassifications of propensity score can effectively balance the measured covariates in observational study, and which works similarly to what randomization do in RCTs. So after you obtain a score for each member of interest, you divide them up into two different exposure groups. Usually we have a treatment exposure and you select another comparative treatment. So people on these two different exposure groups are separated, but you rank them from the low value to the high value of propensity score. Afterwards, using our propensity score analysis tool, you can choose to propensity score matching. That's how you match one treatment exposure members to the comparator exposure members, and you drop the unmatched members from your analysis. Alternatively, you can also perform propensity score stratification. Here, as you can see, we combine the two exposure groups again, but still we rank the propensity score from a low value to the high value, showing there at the bottom. In propensity score stratification, you can decide which quantile you're going to use to stratify these members based on their propensity score. For example, if we use quintiles, after you rank the propensity score, you will be identify which members are in the lowest quintile, Q1, to the highest quintile, Q5. So you will have 5 different groups of members, and each stratum, on average and empirically, they have a very similar baseline covariate profile. So we are just going to talk about the matching and stratification today, but actually in real world, there are also other methods to utilize propensity score in terms of confounding adjustment. For example, restrictions, adjustments, and weighting methods. And nevertheless, the use of propensity score alleviates the need for the outcome model to further adjust for these covariates or member characteristics that we just talked about, which is particularly useful in a distributed database setting like Sentinel. So for each of our 2 propensity score methods, there are always strengths and limitations. For example, propensity score matching, it's a widely used method, and then it trims the always treated versus the never treated. It achieves bias reduction through balancing out the measured confounders. But at the same time, because propensity score keep the matched cohort only, you lose some people from your analysis, like I just showed how you remove the unmatched members in the animation. You got a smaller cohort from the original user population, and you may lose some precision because of that in the final effect estimates. And also, there might be a generalizable issue because right now you may end up with a different analytic sample from the original user population. In contrast, the stratification intend to keep the entire user cohort from the both treatment exposure groups. And by doing that, you retain the precisions that came along with the original sample size. And it makes your analysis more generalizable to the user population. The limitation of propensity score stratification, however, you may observe some residual confounding within the extreme stratas due to imbalances in the number of people in each exposure group. And then the characteristic tables, or in epidemiology, we typically call it table 1s, it can be difficult to obtain or interpret. So typically, when you do observational studies or when you use our propensity score analysis, you choose one method but not the other. And there are, right now in this slide, show you some considerations before you move on with one of these 2 approaches. And there's always the trade-off of the sample size concerns, whether you have a rare outcome, and that is the time that you probably need a very big sample. There's also the bias reduction concern, and then the trade-off of precision and bias. All right. So that's the simple overview of the propensity score methods. And here we're going to go over step by step how to parameterize our propensity score analysis tool. And we're going to use a case study which look at the ACE inhibitors versus beta blocker users on their risk of angioedema. So we performed this test, and it was intended to mimic a previously completed Sentinel protocol-based assessment This work was published back in 2012, conducted by my colleague Darren Toe and other Sentinel collaborators. We compare the two exposures on the risk of angioedema. And our treatment exposure, which are the ACE inhibitors, aka the angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, they can actually biologically induce angioedema. This outcome is a rapid swelling localized underneath the skin. And then it's primarily caused by vascular leakage. So biological pathway showing here on the screen on the right-hand side, you can see the red box pathway. It's a biological mechanism to produce hypertension. And the green box pathway shows you at the same time the biological mechanism to produce angioedema. So where is ACE inhibitor? It's right here. Once the ACE inhibitors inhibit angiotensin converting enzyme, it actually blocks, it will successfully block the red box pathway, lead to hypertension. So it helps and improve your hypertension, but at the same time, it also interferes the degradation of bradykinin, which is the primary substance that leads to the angioedema. So it's a positive and negative effect at the same time, causing the degradation failure. So we also use this stoplight. Before we go ahead and go into our database to identify how many users are with the exposures, we always examine the data feasibilities to identify exposure, covariates, and outcomes of interest. And here we're gonna simply go over, for example, can we reliably identify our treatment exposure from the Sentinel database? And the answer is yes, because ACE inhibitors are the type of exposure that you can self-administer, and they can be obtained from outpatient pharmacy, and they are oral medications taken regularly by the patients. The same is true for our comparator exposure. In our case study, these will be the beta blockers. So at the time we conducted the study, there were also other drugs of interest that we can use as comparator, but we eventually choose beta blockers because they share very similar indications with ACE inhibitors, and then they are not thought to increase or decrease the risk of angioedemas. Now, very important to also look at the stoplight system, how it works for the outcome. For our outcome, which is angioedema, it's medically attended outcome with acute onset. It has clear diagnostic criteria, and you can use previously validated outcome algorithms to identify this event from the Sentinel distributed database. So in the following slides, I'm going to go over how to conduct the propensity score analysis. But before we actually do that, we also have the level 1 capabilities. So let's take one step back to think about, whether we can obtain some more descriptive information for our cohorts before we move on to the inferential analysis. So using the Sentinel level 1 capabilities, you can typically obtain a user count of the ACE inhibitors or beta blocker users in your data set. You can also observe for other purposes, for example, exposure uptake, exposure use patterns, or do you have what is the outcome event rate or risk? And then do you have enough follow-up time in your database to conduct something like time to event analysis? Well, because when we did the test, it was already replicating a known relationship, a positive relationship between our exposure and the outcome. So for the training purpose, we did not additionally perform any level 1 analysis. So moving on to the level 2 analysis. So here are 5 steps that we do when we conduct a propensity score analysis in Sentinel. The first step is always identify the treatment exposure and comparator exposure cohorts. In our case, that would be members who use ACE inhibitors and beta blockers. And then you extract covariate or baseline characteristic information from these cohorts. The third step will be estimating a exposure propensity score for these members. You either match on or stratify by propensity score for the two treatment groups, two treatment exposure groups, and comparator exposure groups. And then you generate the effect estimates and output the reports. So something to note and special about the distributed database is that the first 4 steps, as noted and stressed in yesterday's annual workshop, these steps are performed and the stats program packages are executed at individual data partner side. And only until the last step, when the data partner executed the package, they have aggregated level of data, they send it back to SOC. We perform at SOC the outcome models to generate effect estimates, confidence intervals, and all the standard outputs we have for propensity score analysis. So recap of our case study objective, it was to evaluate the association between angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and angioedema with beta blockers as a comparison exposure. The study design is a retrospective new user cohort design. And then we actually conducted a test twice, both run on data sources that are formatted into the Sentinel common data model. Remember that in ARIA, this is a primary component of ARIA as well. It's the common data model. Once you have the data formatted into the Sentinel, the common data model, you can employ our tool with proper parameterization, then you can run the propensity score analysis quick and fast. So the first test we distributed to all data partners contributing to the Sentinel distributed database. 13 data partners returned their results, but the data year was a little bit older. So recently, we retest again with newer data using market scan, also formatted into a Sentinel common data model. We recently acquired this database to use as query test purpose before we send out a formal program package to our data partners. So we run the test again on this data set, and you will know that the data years are so much newer than the previous testing, and we are going to show the results from this test run in this training session. So for the analysis, remember that we are to evaluate the risk of angioedema during active treatment time on either ACE inhibitors or beta blockers. For training purpose, we're going to show how to parameterize both methods, propensity score matching and stratification, also show the results from both methods. So the outcome model we use is a cost proportional hazard model and with a maximum follow-up time of 90 days. In the original protocol-based assessment, it actually has a follow-up time of 365 days. But we know already from the same analysis that you can already observe significant risk increase in the first 90 days post-exposure. So here's the first step. How do we identify the treatment and comparator exposure cohorts in Sentinel distributed database? We primarily use the outpatient pharmacy dispensings and use the national drug codes recorded in these dispensings to identify treatment exposures or comparator exposures. And here are the list of the ACE inhibitors and beta blockers. Now, who is in my cohort? If you recall, in several slides back, we are interested in new user cohort design. So the definition of a new user is that you have a exposure initiation, that would be the day 0 or index day in our tool. And then we define a period of time that you can wash out and look back. Because it's a new use, the requirement of a new use, we are only interested in patients with no prior exposure to either exposure treatment. For example, the ACE inhibitors or beta blockers in the prior 183 days. So this is more like a design diagram, but you can translate these options into the tool specifications. Typically, you will have one cohort, new users of ACE inhibitors, and then another cohort, new users of beta blockers. You bracket the index date using a query period that is 2011 to 2014 data. In order to observe the washout period, there's no any prior use of the treatment of interest. We require the medical coverage, at the same time the drug coverage on the exposure date and also the time that we look back. So every member in our cohort needs to be 18 years or older, and the washout period we define as 183 days in our case study. And then there are also products that you defined, new use with your treatment exposure cohorts. In our example, the new users of either treatment exposure group will need to be new with respect to both treatment exposure ACE inhibitors and beta blockers. Afterwards, you can additionally define the inclusion and exclusion criteria for each ACE inhibitors or beta blocker cohort. Requesters may specify these criteria in a pre-exposure period to evaluate the presence or absence of medical conditions or treatment of interest. At the same time, in order to effectively assess the presence or absence of these conditions or treatments, you will require a continuous enrollment in medical coverage. If you only focus on medical conditions, you can only require medical coverage. If you're also interested in drug exposure, you will also require the continuous enrollment for drug coverage. But drug coverage is more essential because that would also impact the new use definition of your drug exposure. So the blue look back window shows the time that we also impose the exclusion criteria assessment. In our case, the ACE inhibitors and beta blocker new users are required to have no evidence of allele scarring or RBUs in the prior 183 days. So R will be the angiotensin II receptor blocker. So again, we translate these options into specifications. For both exposure cohorts, we exclude any prior exposure of the two drugs that I just mentioned in a window of 183 days pre-index. Now, how to define an exposure episode in using the propensity score analysis tool? This part and the following 3 slides are more like a recap or review of our last year's training. So if you want to know more detail on these, you can always go back to the recording. But briefly now, to create a treatment episode, we use the outpatient pharmacy dispensing dates and day supply information. And we have the options to adjust for early refill, late refill, and then extension after all evidence of day supply. For example, these are the dispensings that show the early refill patterns. If we observe 3 30-day dispensing from the record, and you use directly just the dispensing dates, you will identify an active treatment time of 83 days. But we provide the option of stockpiling. So after stockpiling, this is called standard stockpiling. You would kind of stockpile all the overlapping dates supplied, and then you will have a continuous treatment episode defined as 90 days that will reflect all amount of day supply in those dispensings. And then for late refills, we also have the options to connect these refills that have small gaps between them. So for the late refills, we define the maximum allowable gaps. If the gaps between the refills of these dispensings are within the maximum allowable gap, then we bridge the gaps and define them as part of the active treatment. A third option is to apply an extension to extend the average time beyond active treatment identified from stockpiling or standard episode definitions. So here is what we've done so far. You stockpile or allow bridge the gaps, and then at the end of it, you can always apply an extension. This is not required, and you can specify 0 if you don't want this option. So after you define a continuous episode, Here, showing now on the screen, if we choose to use stockpiling and bridging, gap bridging, and then also extension, you will end up with a 108 days continuous exposure time. So we do the same. Therefore, in the design diagram, you start seeing a line that would show that would reflect the continuous exposure of ACE inhibitors right there. And the same is true for the beta blockers. But the program needs to know when to stop follow-up. It's the default standard would be the end of the exposure episode, but there are also other censoring events that you can pre-specify and tell the program to stop follow-up at those points. For example, here on the right-hand side in the last column are the censoring criteria that we use in the case study. That would include the member disenrollment from their health plans, and also the data end or query end, and the initiation of the other study drug. For ACE inhibitor cohorts, that would be the beta blocker. For beta blocker cohorts, that would be the ACE inhibitor. And also other exclusion exposures, such as Alice gearing and ARB. We can also censor them upon death if that show up in the Sentinel distributed database. And then remember, we also have a maximum follow-up of 90 days in the case study for training purpose. And then in the middle columns, you can see our options to define the exposure episodes. Here we use the standard stockpiling algorithm. We employ a 14-day maximum allowable episode gap. We also employ a exposure extension of 14 days. The next step is to define the outcome of interest. To define the outcome of interest, you're freely to use any combination of codes that Sentinel distributed database have. Those fields are usually, you can look up them from the Sentinel's common data model. And then for health outcomes of interest, you can require them to occur in specific care settings, such as inpatient only, outpatient only, or emergency department, and so forth and so on. And then if it's inpatient diagnosis that you require to identify your outcome, you can also choose to identify only principal discharge diagnosis or secondary ones. There's also an outcome look-back period to identify. In our case, we're interested in a new incidence outcome. We employed a pre-exposure look-back window for the outcome incidence. So here, visualize the outcome incidence assessment, also pre-index. So in this diagram, you can see the star representing the outcome. It will be captured if it happened during an active treatment time. And then we calculate the days at risk, starting the day 0 time to the time that you observe outcome in our database. There are several windows for looking back for new use definition, inclusion, exclusion, and also outcome incidence. There's also a window related to covariates, of course. You don't need to align all these windows in our tools. You are free to choose different lengths for these windows as long as it makes epidemiological and clinical sense. But our recommendation is that you always require a continuous enrollment assessment covering the longest length of your look-at period for different criteria. That way you can effectively identify whether people meet medical conditions or drug exposures prior to index date in your cohort. So continue the discussion of outcome identification. In our case study, we used one single code that was ICD-9 diagnosis of 995.1 to identify the angioedema outcome occurrence, be it in an inpatient admission, during an inpatient admission, outpatient visit, or emergency department visit. But Sentinel also provides the capability to use the or operators to require 2 or more codes to occur within a pre-specified window. For example, showing on the screen is what we did in the original protocol-based assessment. You can define serious angioedema as inpatient diagnosis plus ICU admission, or other surgery procedure codes or intubation procedure codes within 2 days of hospital admission. Now, please note that this is not a perfect example. As we all know that using the administrative and claims database, there are tons of inpatient claims that tend to bundle all health services for the single admission. So we may not be able to reliably identify the co-occurrence of inpatient admissions and procedures that happened during that admission. However, this example is shown here to show that we have the capability to define two different things and co-occurrence at one period of time and use that as an outcome. So if you recall yesterday's IMED example, we actually also use a combo tool to define the venous thromboembolism and then followed by anticoagulant use within a week or 30 days. So that's another example of using this combo tool. Again, translate the outcome options into specifications. Here's the ICD-9 definition we use and the care setting we selected to determine the outcome. And it also has the incidence criteria because we are interested in our case studies to follow people up until the first occurrence of angioedema. And then the look back period incident criteria for the outcome is 183 days pre-index. So a quick summary of our case study specification. We choose to compare ACE inhibitor users to beta blocker new users. And these people should be age 18 years or older with a valid, continuously enrolled exposure washout period of at least 183 days. We exclude people that has the prior use of the other study drug, aliskiren, ARBs, or the prior event of interest. And then we started the follow-up since day 0, that's the exposure initiation, continue until the first occurrence of the following. It could be the event occurrence, angioedema, that's identified through Sentinel database system, disenrollment, cessation of the study drug use, initiation of the exclusion drugs or the other study drug, query end, data end, and the maximum follow-up period end. And of course, our outcome is angioedema. So all these specifications, along with the design diagrams, they are in accordance with the recommendations from the joint EASE-4-EASE-B Special Task Force on using the real-world evidence to inform healthcare decision-making. Before we actually enter the analysis, there is one pre-processing step in our tool to evaluate overlap of members showing up in both exposure group. If the same patient initiates treatment and comparator exposures on the same day, we remove this patient from the analysis. If the patient is identified in the treatment and the comparator exposure cohorts in the same query period, we retain this patient for the earliest exposure cohort. So to visualize this, here's the patient A. This patient has ACE inhibitor exposure, and then followed by a valid beta blocker initiation exposure time. New use exposure. Both of these exposures meet the criteria of your new use, inclusion, exclusion, and then an outcome incidence assessment. But because this patient has mixed information, we choose to retain this patient A in our ACE inhibitor cohort only and stop follow-up time at the time either all the sensory criteria happened, event occurrence, or the natural end of the ACE inhibitor episode end. This means that the same patient is not allowed to re-enter our cohort of analysis. So the second step is to extract covariate information for our members. Same as previous, the requesters are free to specify the covariates for inclusion to put in the propensity score estimation model. And it could be the baseline demographic information, age, sex, year of exposure, or any other clinical concept that can be defined using the Sentinel distributed database codes. And then we can also include the healthcare utilization or drug utilization metrics. And then the look back period doesn't have to align with all the other assessment windows, and you can specify that before you run the analysis. So these are the covariates that eventually enter our case study. And in the original protocol-based assessment, we searched the literature to find these risk factors for our ACE inhibitor beta blocker cohorts. So that would include age, sex, year of exposure, comorbidity score, healthcare and drugs utilization, also the medical history of allergic reactions, diabetes, heart failure, and ischemic heart disease. To the extent possible, we also find any claim-based evidence of NSAID use. And the evaluation window for the covariates is 183 days pre-index. So after you extract this covariate information, you have your cohorts, you use the covariate information to run the propensity score estimation model. So remember, we see this funnel in the beginning of the presentation. The funnel actually represents the logistic regression that predicts the treatment exposure. In our case, that would be the ACE inhibitor use. So once you output a propensity score for each member in your cohorts, you either match on or stratify by the score between the two exposure groups. So here's the visuals that I just showed for propensity score matching. And to parameterize our tool, you will need to specify the ratio and calipers to use in the propensity score matching. We choose to use the nearest neighbor algorithm because this algorithm reduces the absolute difference in propensity score across all match sets. And then the ratio, we provide the option of a 1-to-1 matching without replacement, or you can do variable ratio matching up to 1-to-10. And then the caliper can be set as any value between 0 and 1. It defines the maximum distance allowed between the two matched patients on propensity score, of course. Alternatively, if you choose to do a propensity score stratification, this is the visual that I just showed, you will need to specify the percentiles to use. These percentiles will basically divide the treatment and comparator exposure cohorts into requester-defined percentiles. So for example, if you choose 5, that would be quintiles. If you choose 10, that would be deciles. Before package distribution, remember that we said the first 4 steps of this propensity score analysis happen at the data partner side. So once you distribute the program package, there's no return. You have to execute the analysis, and if data partner choose to return the results, we will get the aggregated results. But before you distribute the package, you should always consider whether you want to add any sensitivity analysis. So everything needs to pre-specify in the distributed database. And then those sensitivity analysis could be the new user definition variation, inclusion, exclusion criteria difference, exposure episode definitions, outcome definitions, look back window length, or follow-up times. Of course, the propensity score method specifications can change to serve as a sensitivity analysis as well. So after you distribute the package, and the data partners will execute the program package at their individual sites, once they are done, they will return the aggregate results to Sentinel Operations Center. And at SOC, that is the time we perform the outcome model, generate the effect estimates and confidence intervals, and output the standard reports. We choose to use a Cox proportional hazard model, and this is the built-in model that we use in our tool. It will provide the effect estimation, and then requesters can specify different propensity score adjusted analysis. For training purpose, we'll show the results of both, but you actually have the option to choose the match unconditional analysis, match conditional analysis, so that is stratified by the match set, and then also the propensity score stratified analysis. All outcome models are at the same time stratified by data partners as different data partners could have different user population distribution. And then the unmatched results for the original user cohorts are always default output. To note that for propensity score matching only, we also have the capability to specify subgroup analysis. These subgroup can be identified using the user-defined covariate levels. For example, if you're interested only in male exposure to these target medications, you can do that as a subgroup analysis. And current capability will have to rematch the patients within the subgroup levels and perform the effect estimation. In the future, and this is still under development, we hope to develop a capability that would match both on propensity score, but also the subgroup levels. Again, we will remove the need to do rematching, and then that's also useful in the distributed database analysis. So translate options to specifications. We ultimately, in the case study, use one-to-one matching, caliper of 0.025. For stratification, we also choose a quintile analysis. It's not quintile analysis, it's a quintile-based stratification analysis. The Cox proportional hazard model, we're going to show results for unmatched analysis, match unconditional, and stratify analysis. So once you completed these 5 steps, we have the outputs for you to evaluate the results. And these outputs include 2 things. First of all, the diagnostics of your program performance or cohort assessment. And then also the outcome model, you will have the effect estimates. By data partner, we provide the cohort attrition table, cohort sensory table, and that would mean the number of episodes by sensor time and sensory reasons. Propensity score distributions, pre and post matching. Everything I just mentioned is per DP level. And we also have the aggregate outputs to show you the pre and post matching cohort baseline characteristic, the aggregate output for KM curves, effect estimates, and confidence intervals. You can choose to output to receive the diagnostics before you go ahead and evaluating the frequency of outcomes or the final effect estimates. So by attrition table, unfortunately, we do not automatically generate this beautiful chart, but we will have the numbers that enough for you to fill in these individual boxes. For example, in our case study, we started from 99 million of members. After enrollment requirement and age consideration, for ACE inhibitors, we end up with 1.9 million of users, meeting all of our cohort definitions and requirement. Beta blockers would have 1.5 million, almost 1.5 million members in our analysis. So this is an example of our standard output for the unmatched cohort, and it will be a table 1 characteristic table. Here, we provide the characteristic value and summary statistic by exposure group. That would be ACE inhibitor and beta blocker in our case study. We also provide the covariate balance diagnostic columns. For example, the absolute difference or the standardized difference columns. In our case study, you can see that we have 1.8 and 1.3 users for respectively ACE inhibitors and beta blockers. These numbers are slightly lower, if you recall the attrition table here, the end results, and the difference is caused by the pre-processing of propensity score analysis. That is not allowing people to re-enter our analytic cohort. So there are a few members that we remove because they could have same-day exposure of these 2, or they have 2 valid episodes during the entire query period. So if that happens, we either remove them or select them for their earliest exposure in our cohort. So from here, quickly you can identify that the beta blocker users are significantly more female members using these drugs, and then they're more likely to have had heart failure, ischemic heart disease prior to exposure. There are also differences in the health services utilization metrics. And in the propensity score analysis, we typically use standardized differences to diagnose the balance between your exposure cohort. And the value of plus and minus 0.01, if you're exceeding that value, is considered imbalance in general. And the tool we have will automatically bold those numbers that is beyond that threshold. So this is a pre-matching propensity score distribution by data partner. Red means the beta blocker users, and then blue means the ACE inhibitor users. And then remember, propensity score is collecting all member covariate profile information. Put that in a logistic regression and output a probability as their propensity score. Because it's a probability, the full range of the score is from 0 to 1. And because we're using the model to predict the treatment exposure, in our case, that would be the ACE inhibitor use, you can see in general, the blue bars have a higher average value of propensity score. That's why they're clustering toward the right-hand side. And then the red bars having an, on average, slightly lower propensity score. However, in the same distribution histogram, you can see a good area of overlap in the middle between the two exposure groups. So a good and large area of common support suggests that the two exposure groups are deemed as comparable in terms of their opportunities or probabilities of getting the ACE inhibitor treatments. And at the same time, they have very similar covariate profiles in each propensity score. So we can use this histogram to assess whether the two cohorts can reasonably be compared, and there will be no complete discrimination. In the case of complete discrimination, you would see a visually more like a bimodal distribution, one exposure group clustering toward the high level, the other one the low level of propensity score. So this is not happening, which means we have a good cohort. And then using the pre-matching propensity score distribution, it also provides you analytical cohort, their distribution between the two treatment group members on their propensity score stratification results. For example, you will see the Q1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if you use quintile. That's what we did in our case study. And then you can see the relative number of people in each quintile from both treatment exposure group. After matching, here you keep the common support, the overlapping part of the two exposure group members. And then we provide these post-matching histograms to assure that our matching performs well. In a good performance matching result, you will see the two exposure group members on top of each other, which is just like what we show here. We again provide the baseline characteristic table, or the table once, but this time is after matching. So these characteristics are the matched sample. So you can see 56% of the ACE inhibitor user cohorts were preserved after matching. And then the beta blockers were to a larger extent. But if you look at their standardized difference, they are actually more balanced after matching. The KM curve, red line shows the survival rate of the ACE inhibitor users, and you can see it drops so much faster compared to beta blockers. And KM curves are useful to assess the fraction of patients still contributing to the analysis at any given follow-up time. And you can visually also look at the propensity score hazard assumptions. So what do we have in standard output for propensity score strata? The pre-matching distribution of propensity score already told us the distribution of the treatment and comparator exposure members within each pre-specified stratum. And we also provide a stratum-specific summary. Here, per quantile, you will get the user count for both treatment group, for both exposure group, the event count, and follow-up time. And then we provide that in an aggregate level and also per quintile in our case study. There are more outputs in development, including the stratum-specific cohort characteristic tables. The final result of our propensity score analysis, this will be a table 2 in our tool. It shows that per medical product, the number of new users, time at risk in person year, and then event counts, incidence rate difference, risk and risk difference, and finally hazard ratios and p-values. In the first 2 rows, you will always get the unmatched results, only adjusted per data partner side, and then you will also get the one-to-one match on unconditional analysis results. You can see from the numbers there that because of matching, the sample size dropped a little bit, dropped to just over 1 million for both exposure group, and then both unmatched and matched cohorts have very similar average time at risk, follow-up time. However, the match unconditional cohort, the match analysis showed that a higher incidence rate, and then that is associated to the elevated hazard ratio. We can also have the results reported from stratified propensity score analysis. And then because propensity score stratification, remember, it keeps the entire user cohort, you can see the user sample size are the same as the unmatched analysis. And then simply by using quintile, you divide people up to 5 different groups without losing any of the members in the user cohort, you can still observe an elevated risk up to 3. So to visually present the effect estimates, if you have the unmatched results, that would be the blue line area. You will have 2.5 point estimate for hazard ratio. But after propensity score adjustment, either of the methods bring the hazard ratio up to around 3. And because propensity score stratification preserve a larger sample of our user cohorts, it has a tighter confidence interval, and in other words, a higher precision in their estimates. So compare our results. Remember, all our test was to replicate a protocol-based assessment. This was the results published using propensity score stratification in 2012, and then the final propensity score adjusted results were 3.04. And visually, all our replication work reached a very similar range of effect estimates. The only difference is probably because the previous test used a larger sample, even though it's older data. So a quick summary, I'm running over time here, but a quick summary of our take-home message is that the Sentinel propensity score analysis tool builds in 2 different propensity score methods. You can choose matching or stratification at the time of analysis, but always remember that there will be different implications on generalizability. If you choose matching, your results are out of a matched sample, versus when you choose stratification, you're using the entire user cohorts identified from your database. And then precision in, there's also the precision and bias concern in your effect estimates. Standard outputs include not only a simple diagnostic, for example, the standardized difference that we just saw in the table 1s, and also we have the outcome estimates, effect estimates such as hazard ratios and 95% confidence interval. And then because they are tools already predefined, quality check, they are always ready to use in any data formatted to Sentinel Common Data Model. These program packages are publicly available, and you can find them in the homepage of Sentinel. If you're more, you can find out even more details in remember we have a first test. This is a publication out of a first test. It tells you how we parameterize the L2 propensity score analysis tool to try to replicate the propensity protocol-based assessment that published even earlier. Questions? We also take questions online. Yes.
So The study you showed, is that what the tool does, or is it you just showed the study, what the study did, and that you could reproduce it in the tool? Or is there more in the tool that you didn't show because the study didn't do it?
So every step, oh, okay, the question was that the study that I just showed, is it the tool work or the original study? So those results are out of the propensity score analysis tool in Sentinel. And then we also have a reference results because we're using a tool trying to replicate a original protocol-based assessment. And then the results were comparable.
But are you going to show what actually is, what the tool encompasses? What kind of choices that there are? So you said, for example, there's matching and stratification.
Mm-hmm.
But there could be all sorts of other things. For example, there's multidimensional propensity scoring and the whole time. Is this it, or is there more and you're going to show more? I just don't know.
The current capability of our tool is either matching or stratification. We also have the high dimensional propensity score built in the tool, but we don't really have a applied example to show here.
Okay. So today you're going to just stick with the study and show us how to reproduce the study.
Yes.
Hi. You mentioned and or operators to better define an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure, is there a not operator or a coding way to get around that so that you can use that same idea?
That's a very great question. The question is asking about the and or operator to combine occurrence of two different code-identified events. So yes, we do have a not operator, but it's sort of like, it's not a third option. It's like when you use the and operator, you can use exclusion of things to achieve the not results. Right. Any other questions? Do I have time?
I have a technical questions. When you define the exposure group, so you have two drug exposure, but you're saying if one happened prior to the other one, you choose the prior one.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between the exposure, it could be just 1 day. Is that the criteria?
Oh. Yes, so the question is about the re-entry of the same member if they have both exposure in our study database. So the second episode needs to qualify all those new use, inclusion, exclusion, and outcome incidence criteria as well. So the minimum difference between the end of ACE inhibitor follow-up in our example and the start of beta blocker will have to greater than 183 days.
Oh, I see.
Yes. If there are no other questions, I think it's time for us to have a break. We'll get back here in 13 minutes. Thank you.
So this wasn't central to your talk, but one of the things that description of the criteria for selection and who drops out at which stage. Right now it's kind of high level aggregates without detail. I understand that's being updated. Time frame on
Yes.
yeah, that's it. So sometimes either clinically, logically, even certain similarities. Your name is Sarah. Sequence or group things together. Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. Thank you so much. Yeah. So